Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to the Town of Cumberland Planning Board meeting for Tuesday, February 15th, 2022. Roll call, we have 5 of 7 of us here. Since our last meeting, Amanda Berticelli stepped down from her position for personal reasons, and I want to thank her for her service. I think she was here a year and much appreciate her perspective and the time that she put in. And then we got shocking news this past weekend that Bill Kenny passed away. Bill was a member of the planning board here, as well as many things that he did in town. He was an interesting guy. The more you learned about him, you learned lots of neat things. He recently wrote a book on the history of railroad, and I much enjoyed his perspective and jokes that he put on Facebook, and he was a neat guy. As one staff member put it, he was like our kind uncle. He always made you feel laugh and let you know you were special to him, and he did this for everybody. Does anybody else want to say anything?
I just echo what you said, Jason. Big loss.
Condolences to his family, and I assume at some point we'll put out some information to all on services and that sort of stuff. Moving on, approval of minutes for January 18th meeting. Do I hear a motion?
I will make a motion, we adopt the minutes as written.
Second.
Any issues? Anybody? Okay. All in favor? All opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. Staff site plan approvals, looks like we had none. And minor change approvals, looks like we had none. So, moving on to hearings and presentations, we have one tonight, which is a public hearing, a recommendation to the Town Council for a proposed contract zone agreement with Synergosity LLC for the Grange at Longwoods, 76 Longwoods Road, Tax Assessor Map R03, Lot 13, and Map R03, Lot 6A in the RR1 zone. So this has been a it's a bit of a process, because a contract zone is done because of the use that's wanted isn't allowed, and this is in RR1 zone. So for those playing along at home, we are in step 8 of a step 9 process, or a 9-step process. So the application originally came to the town, was reviewed by the town manager and planner, then it goes to the council for acceptance, and then there is a neighborhood meeting. And then many months ago, we had a workshop with the town council and planning board that the people here were involved in. And after that, based on lots of feedback and conversation, it was further revised and has now gone to the town attorneys for review and to assist in drafting the CZA. So that has all gone through. It has gone through to the town council, and there was unanimous support for this. So now it is coming to us. So the note from Bill was, so this is a good overview. As you know, a CZA is a new zoning ordinance. It allows uses typically not permitted in the underlying zone to occur. In exchange, the town has usually received conservation lands or other public improvements. In this case, the Grange Hall serves as a restaurant and a pub inside the RR1 zone, which is typically a more rural and residential zone. Nearly 90% of this gateway property into Cumberland will be protected under a conservation easement ultimately held by our own land trust. The developed portion of this land is located nearly 1,000 feet back from Longwoods. The access to this site is presently via a gravel road, which will remain. When this project returns for site plan review to the planning board, they will need to have this resolved, blah, blah, blah. So, do you want to add on to that, Carla?
Just very briefly, the reason that the planning board weighs in at this point is that it's your job to look at the proposed contract zone and make a determination if it's generally consistent with our comprehensive plan. And so there are all sorts of things you can find in the comp plan that this is reflective of, such as preservation of open space, preservation of the area adjacent to the river and stream, the trails. Lots of good things are part of this proposal. So that's really the key thing tonight, is to hear from the development team. Alex Timpson is Synergosity. He is here. He's here with Jeff Reed from CV Mahar Engineers, who is their engineer, and their attorney, Brenda Buchanan, who's been invaluable in helping shape this document that you have before you tonight.
Okay, thank you. So when you guys are ready, take it away, introduce yourself, and
Sure. Hello. My name's Brenda Buchanan. I'm an attorney, and I represent Synergosity. Mr. Timpson is the principal there, and I'm glad to be here tonight to walk you through this in a little bit more detail. I recognize your faces, some of you, from when we had a joint workshop with the town council back at, I don't know, it was a lot warmer then. I guess it was probably September or something. And I'm sorry, I want to say, for the loss of your colleague. I was saddened to hear about that. So, Jeff has put this up, and I think I can even, oh yeah, there we go. This property is 61 and a half acres, located on the westerly side of the Longwoods Road. There are 2 tax parcels. One's 42 acres. That is map R03 lot 13. The other is about 19 acres. The larger one is the one with the existing farmhouse and barn are located. The contract zone would allow for mixed-use project to include residential, agricultural, commercial, and recreational uses. And there's a significant conservation element to it. As Carla mentioned, actually, about 90% of it, 54 acres. Traditionally, this has been a farm. It will stay in agricultural use. Also, natural resources, the riverfront and the wetlands will also be protected under that conservation easement. At the outset, the conservation easement will be held by Maine Farmland Trust, excuse me, and then it'll be transferred eventually to Chebegan Cumberland Land Trust, which Chris Cabot's here tonight, and Penny Asherman, both from CCLT. So the commercial aspect of the project is a restaurant and event space to be known as the Grange Hall Pub. The residential is the existing farmhouse and barn, and potentially another residential building that will provide housing for the farm operator, or maybe farm hands, or the employees of the Grange Hall Pub. Those 2 uses, commercial and residential, will be clustered in the farmstead area, which is this light yellow area, and the developed area, which is the darker yellow area. The recreational aspect of the project includes trails for activities like skiing, cross-country skiing, and hiking, and bird watching, and things like that. So I will just quickly, I know you've got the whole proposal, but I'll just quickly walk through what it is. The conservation area is what's shaded in green on the map. And Section 2A of the CZA describes the uses that would be allowed anywhere within the conservation area, which is essentially agricultural activity and some structures that are needed to support that activity, and recreational activity and outdoor sculpture. You'll note that a portion is called the view shed here. And that's part of the conservation area, but there's going to be some restrictions on the size, the nature, and the location of agricultural structures there, basically to keep the view shed nice. It's where, as Bill says in his memo, Bill Shane, that, deer, you see sometimes grazing there. It's pretty when you're just coming into town. The idea is that that will not be the site of too many buildings. There may be some farm activity there, but it won't be heavy construction of, large building. Or, if they're going to be hoop houses, there'll be other places, in other words. Section B of Section 2B outlines additional uses that will be allowed in the conservation area, the other green shaded parts, that are not the view shed. So that includes the residential use, which is in the farmstead area. And the farmstead area is part of the conservation easement. So it's part of the conservation area. But there are already some buildings there, a house and barn, those will stay. There may be a farmer's market or a farm store featuring produce from the farm itself, maybe other farms in town or in the area. Forest management, cutting of trees will be allowed, timber harvesting, possibly a sawmill, a portable sawmill for efficiency's sake. But again, those things can't happen down in the view shed area. They can only happen in the other parts of the conservation area. And all of what happens in that conservation area is going to be controlled by that conservation easement. The terms of that easement are really going to restrict that to agricultural uses. Section 2C talks about the developed area. So the developed area is this sort of gold, I guess, or dark yellow. And that's where the Grange Hall Pub will be, and as well as possibly a future residential building that may be a single-family house, and it may end up being more of a lodging house as defined by your ordinance, depending on what the need is. When a farmer's identified, and, all that will shake out. While the Grange Hall's being built, a temporary food operation and beverage operation will be allowed in the form of a couple of food trucks or outdoor similar food preparation, things like an outdoor pizza oven is what really is on Al's mind, and a beverage cart. And those under this would be allowed for a year, could come back to the town council and get additional permission if for some reason supply chain issues or construction delays cause the Grange Hall not to be done for a year, but the idea is that that is a temporary situation. And during that time, temporary, like a standalone tent with chairs underneath so that if it's a rainy day, people will have some shelter, will also be allowed. Those sort of tents would also be allowed after the Grange Hall is built for special events like weddings. And they won't be able to be down in the view shed. Again, they're in the developed area. So if you know the lay of the land, of course, there's a hill that goes up. So you're not really going to see from the Longwoods Road a lot of this developed area. The Grange Hall itself will house a pub and a restaurant. It'll have a special event room for things like, get-togethers, retirement parties, family reunions. Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, sorry, over here. Yep, sorry. That's where it's going to be located. And it'll have an outdoor terrace, sort of a patio, a retractable awning will be there so that it can be used during bad weather. It will have licenses to serve food and alcohol. There will also be the operation will have to get a special amusement permit to allow for music. In the submission, we talked about music, amplified music being 10 a.m., 10 p.m. Since Al and I have talked about that, and I know this is really a site plan review detail, so we'll come back and talk to you about this at another time. But just to put a marker down, we're really hoping that actually the indoor amplified music could go till 11 p.m. Outdoor would still stop at 10 p.m. This is a long way from anybody else's buildings, but the idea of having music till 11 is probably not an outrageous thing, at least on a weekend. The architectural style of the Grange Hall will be consistent with those found on Main Farms. Same with the, any new residential structure that may be built in this developed area. It will look like a farmhouse, whether it will be a single family or whether it will be more in the nature of a lodging house to support farm workers, again, remains to be seen. Until a farmer is on board, we don't really know what will be the sensible thing to do. Residential is, of course, already allowed in this zone, so that's no different, really. The farmstead area is shown in light yellow on the map. That's, again, where already the house and barn is located. And it is part of the conservation area, so it is controlled by the conservation easement as well, or, I mean, it is governed, its uses. Exhibit C in your package outlines the terms, the likely terms of the conservation easement. It's going to allow in that farmstead area like other agricultural outbuildings. The existing house, again, may be replaced. It's an old house. It was built about 1860. It could be that at some point that will actually be replaced by a newer building. Again, remains to be seen. I mean, it's a solid enough building, but probably not as well insulated as we'd like to see these days. The conservation easement, I should mention, will be in place before this matter goes back to the town council. So regardless of what you do tonight, we expect to close on the conservation easement with Maine Farmland Trust, which again is the original holder, sometime end of March or so. So this won't go back until the town council, until that is in place. So there will be no question about that. Just some other quick issues. Access, as Carla mentioned and Mr. Shane mentioned in his memo, is over a 20-foot wide driveway that runs westerly from the Longwoods Road. It runs about 1,100 feet, 1,100 feet up. It may be extended to allow access to the developed area. It may need to be. Pullouts will be added so that cars heading in opposite directions can pass. To preserve the rural farm aesthetic, it won't be paved, it'll be a gravel road. Utility lines are not going to change really, other than they might need to be extended to extend the power to both the conservation and the developed area. Waste disposal is septic, all in accordance with town codes. Same water is by a well, similarly governed by town codes and ordinances. The only lighting in the conservation area, all of the green area, will be around the buildings in the farmstead portion. So this other will all not be, there will not be lights there. In the farmstead portion, they will be fully shielded downward facing light, and they'll be on motion detectors from 11 to 7, so that won't be a bright beacon out there on Longwood Road. Future division of the premises, the owner will be allowed, under this contract zone, to divide it once over the course, either to transfer, if necessary, so that the conservation area could be transferred separately from the developed area. And the reason for that is that if it turns out that there's somebody who's interested in taking over the Grange Hall pub who's not a farmer, they may just want to buy the developed area. Or if the farm, which in the beginning will probably be a lease, if the farmer ultimately wanted to buy the farm, they could buy the farm and not have to buy the Grange Hall Pub. It may be that Al will want to run it forever, and it may be that at some point, somebody will come along and want to just buy the whole thing. But we would like to preserve the ability for it to be split into 2 owners, but never any more than 2 owners. In terms of design restrictions and standards, and again, we'll talk about this more when we're back for site plan review, there is no required street frontage because the location of the existing buildings and proposed buildings and the size of the premises, I mean, it's 61 acres with a lot of frontage down on the Longwood Road. And all of the development is going to be clustered in this 10-acre piece here. So, you've got a 3-acre farmstead area, and you've got about 7 acres here in the gold. So all of the development is going to be clustered there. The rest of the 51 will not be anything other than farmland. So the way we have talked about doing the setbacks is that required front, rear, and side will be 15 feet, both between buildings and within the developed area in the farmstead portion, and as between the developed and the conservation area. So 15 feet, kind of all around. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. I know that Jeff and Al also would be happy to do that.
I have a few. I went through the packet, and it looks like a lot of the things that we talked about at the workshop were changed or updated, and much appreciate that. I think I know the answer to some of these, but I kind of wanted to go through some of the questions that I had. So as far as residences go, there's the one that already exists on the farmstead area, and then the tan area is allowed to have 1 additional residence, is that right?
Right, 1 additional residential building, and again, we don't know if that will be a single family or a multi-residential, a lodging type house, or maybe a multifamily. It could be, I think probably either a single family or a lodging house if that's going to be for farm worker labor.
Okay.
But there'll be, a central common area and separate bedrooms.
And it looks like this is still bound by the RR1 zoning, except that we're putting allowances, extra allowances, we're allowing that, right? That's what the CZA is doing,
Right.
is that correct?
It's allowing what's typically not a residential use.
Meaning, so they're still bound by the 4-acre minimum.
No.
It's kind of moot in this point because it's all being rolled into developed area and non-developed area.
Okay.
And the developed area is greater than 4 acres, so do you want to?
Right, if it were going to be divided, the smaller of the 2 pieces would be 10 acres. And the larger would be 51 acres. Because it can only be divided, and that's the only way it can be divided, developed area, conservation area.
Okay. But there isn't, the verbiage that's in there now, there isn't a scenario where that 7 acres of the tan area, if RR1 goes to 2-acre minimum, that then 3 houses would be there?
No,
No,
no.
actually, I misspoke. It will be 7 acres, 54 acres, because the farmstead area is part of the conservation area. So it's only that 7-acre would be the smallest of the 2 parcels, and the other would be 54.
Okay. And can you explain the shape or why the tan area is shaped that way? You must have visions of what you're going to do in that area up closer to the road. Seems like an odd shape.
So this area is all wooded.
Okay.
And we just figured if the farmer wanted to have a little separation and privacy from the actual working part of the farm, which would be all around in there, this might be a nice spot.
Gotcha.
And this is really the golden section of the property in the sense the view looking southwest into these fields with ringed by forest is really pretty magical, especially at especially at sunset. So kind of the busy part of this campus is going to be right here, and the quiet part of this campus is going to be right in here. And this is all wooded, and the woods are pretty much follow this trail line right here, roughly speaking. Actually, yeah, so anyway, this is wooded. Everything else in this 7.5 acre developed area is open field.
Okay. So all buildings have to be either in the tan area or the yellow, is that correct?
That is correct,
Including like livestock buildings, those can't even be in the green area?
correct. And that's heavily regulated.
No, that's not true.
No, that's not true. The conservation easement would permit farm-out buildings, which could be a livestock thing, on the green. They can't be in this area, which is the view shed. They could be back here, where you're not going to see them from the road.
I see.
Temporary structures definition, because that's what can go outside the fence.
So these are things like hoop buildings?
Yes, hoop houses and things like that, right.
Okay.
There also could be, back here, solar panels. There could be a wind turbine. But those will be, again, not in the view shed area. They're going to be in other parts of under the conservation easement.
And is there any limitation to the farming that can be done on there? I remember during the workshop, some of the concerns were sort of like leaving this open so there become like a industrial setup with too many animals and a sort of a burden of smell and that sort of thing.
Well, I think we looked at what the zoning is right now in RR1 and haven't asked for anything more than what's already allowed in RR1 in terms of the agricultural use. The only things that are really different is that while residential is allowed in RR1, commercial is not. So that's really the only real change from RR1 zoning. So the language that we have here in terms of what would be permitted in the, keeping when you go under 2A and number 1, production, keeping, or maintenance for sale or lease of plants or animals, including but not limited to forage and sod crops, that's right out of your ordinance. We're just asking for exactly what's already permitted in that zone. But certainly, if you're going to have a restaurant and a event space, you're not going to want it to be a smelly hog farm.
Right. Can you talk about maintenance costs for the conservation area? The idea is that ends up basically going to the town, correct?
No,
Wow.
CCLT will be the holder of that conservation easement, and will monitor that and steward that to make sure that the promises set forth in the conservation easement,
Right, CCLT, sorry.
CCLT ultimately will be the holder of that, not the town. Right. It'll start out as Maine Farmland Trust, and eventually it will transition to being CCLT.
I think that's all I have for my questions. Other folks have questions? Paul?
Yeah, very interesting project, and I'm very favorable about the entire plan. Just a couple things for interest to me, that in one place, one of the things allowed are low-impact wind turbines, that you just mentioned wind turbines.
Sure.
And two things about that. One is, what is a low-impact wind turbine? And secondly, in the easements section under energy, the turbines are not mentioned, only solar panels. So I'm
Well,
curious, what are low-impact wind turbines? which could-
low-impact wind turbines, as I understand it, and Jeff maybe has a better.
I do a lot of solar, but not a lot of wind.
Yeah, you can answer that, because, yes, okay, you've looked into that more than I have.
So these aren't, we're not talking about windmills. These are things that almost look like sculptures they're cylinder shape, and they're, typically painted different colors, and they spin around, almost like, picture a carousel, but it's almost like shaped like a pepper shaker. They're quite interesting looking, and they're low noise, so they're not like big wind turbines like you're thinking of.
All right, thank you. And should those be included in the easement section to match up with what your, the part where they're allowed? They're not allowed in the easement, only solar panels are
You wanna-
mentioned. And maybe they don't need to be,
So there's going to be at least a 40-page legal document
Okay.
between the conservation easement that regulates all this. And
So
I'm
that-
going to let Chris Cabot, because he knows this document probably a lot better than I do.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, hi, Paul. Just around in the conservation easement, it will say renewable energy structures. So it will, anything renewable energy, whether it's a current technology or future, because we need to write these to last in perpetuity. So it's solar panels now, it's wind generation and some future technology. That can happen anywhere within the farmstead area. And if the landowner wants it to happen outside of that farmstead area, then they need to get land trust permission to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question, I noticed in the section of production, you mentioned dairy animals, poultry animals, and livestock. I was just curious, is that sheep, horses, any livestock is permitted? Is that the intent?
Again, we just took the ordinance language.
Okay, so you're just quoting the.
Yeah, we're
okay,
not wanting
all
to
right,
limit it, whatever's allowed in farms,
Yeah.
we just want to be able to
Okay.
keep.
Thank you.
You don't know until you know who the farmer is, what they're interested in, so
Okay.
try not to limit that.
And the other thing that we talked a little bit about at the workshop, I think, was regarding two other things. One is financial viability. For 1 year, trucks, food trucks and so forth. And hopefully, the Grange will be profitable. And I think at the workshop, we talked about trying to appeal to I don't know if Greater Portland was mentioned, but to a large venue. I mean, it's a large venue that could appeal to a greater population than just Cumberland. Is that, what
Well-
is the key to the financial viability at this point in your assessment?
Well, I think the farm side of it will have its own, finances in the Grange Hall. Like any business, will have to do enough business to cover its costs. I know from other farms that have sort of mixed-use kind of things, and there are several around the state. Most of them do draw from outside their immediate town, because people like to get outside and go to farms and experience that. So I think it certainly would draw beyond Cumberland. I would imagine that Cumberland people, where there's not an awful lot of restaurant options in Cumberland, would be excited to have a restaurant in their own town, and
Yeah, I agree.
probably, at least much of the year, would be the mainstay, sort of. But I think the hope is that people from all over will want to come.
So on that note, under signage, that it's regulated, of course.
Sure.
And, but any progress on what you intend to do there for a sign?
I think just whatever minimal sign that we need on Route 9.
Okay.
It's kind of a straightaway there, and
Is that
again,
obviously could
within
be
the ordinance.
Part of the marketing. And just one other thing that kind of tied into this. The 20-foot road, you mentioned pullouts, and you mentioned it a second ago, but in the document, would a 20-foot road all the way in, right, from
Right.
Route 9, depending on where it ends up? Are pullouts necessary for cars to pass each other? Because if the traffic, if you really were successful, you don't want cars pulling out every car that comes in.
So, it's good, there's finally one here I can answer. So Jeff Reed with CV Mahar. No, so a 10-foot wide travel lane So a 20-foot wide road will be enough to allow 2 vehicles to pass back and forth. It'll be enough to allow snow to clear. So all seasons, there won't be turnouts necessarily. What we had talked about was some additional parking off the side of the road, potentially in the future, to serve some of the trails and that sort of thing, if necessary.
Good, okay. Yeah, I thought 20 would be wide enough.
It's
But it
plenty.
mentioned the
It's
pullout,
plenty.
so
Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you very much.
Sure.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Jason.
Josh?
So my understanding is the intent is to basically have 2 residential buildings, one on the farmstead and one on the developed area, or up to 2, one on each. And one may be a residential home for the farmer, and one may be sort of it could be some form of building where multiple people can live, whether it's a duplex or boarding house or whatever the terminology is. Given that, in here right now, I think it's 2C8, a new residential structure to be occupied, it talks about 2 or more rooming units. Can we put a cap on the more?
Again, I think we pulled that right from the ordinance, which is what is the definition of lodging house in your ordinance. So that's, we just, in talking with staff and council for the town, you know, I think when you're creating the contract zone, and you can't really see around the corner in terms of what you're gonna need, I think you try to work within, you know, the ordinance to talk about this use would be permitted, and the use in your ordinance. So I don't think at this point anybody could answer that question.
Here's
And
my concern,
Put
and
a
it's
cap.
somewhat unfortunate that Bill isn't here, is I believe we are very much tied to this. We do not have a lot of, so in other words, if you came in with a 50 rooming unit, we would have we'd have to approve the site plan. We would have no authority to overrule this contract zoning agreement. And that contract zoning agreement is 2 or more. It doesn't, there is no cap, and I don't believe we would have an authority to establish a cap.
Carl, help me out here, because I'm not exactly sure, but I think if we had a structure like that, we were talking about 50 dwelling units and that sort of thing, that would require a site plan in
Well,
and of itself, right? A site plan application to support that development?
yes, if it's not part of your original
Right.
site plan, that will hopefully show everything that's there now and what you anticipate building or having.
Right.
That's the ideal site plan. And I think Josh is raising an interesting point. I don't think it would hurt to consider limiting the number of, you could do it as beds, you could do it as residents, but I don't think it's ever, have you ever run into this with Bill Longley? He's the one who enforces things like boarding houses. We just don't have them here, so it's a tricky one to know how you would do it. I think the footprint of that building would govern how many people can live in it. And so you would have say over that.
Why?
And the septic.
Why?
Why?
Because
It is subject to the contract zoning agreement, not anything else. There's nothing in here that limits the footprint of a property.
well, we have height limits in the underlying zone.
Okay? Footprint,
Footprint, no. Setbacks, yes.
15 feet.
Isn't septic designed to a certain standard for?
That's another.
I don't, again, contract zones are weird. And it would, I don't mean to be blowing this up, but I also want everybody to know, we don't have a lot of authority to restrict anything beyond what's in here. And if it says 2 or more in the contract zone, that overrules what's in the underlying. I think that gives them the authority to do 2 or more.
Yeah, I think what,
Yes.
Don't know?
I think the way to approach this would be to have this be a question that you pitch back to the council.
Yeah, I mean, and some of that is I mean, I ask these questions really to be answered more by the I mean, we don't have to answer these questions now, but I sort of want them on the record for the council to think about that and to have, did Natalie look at this?
Yeah, oh, yes, she's
Okay.
been heavily involved. It's a really interesting point, Josh. I think we'll look into it.
Right, and I know when we've talked about contract zones before, I know we have had the discussion that we are severely limited in our ability to restrict anything in that contract zone, so long as it meets the language in the contract zone, even if that may be in contrast to the underlying zone. So,
Well, certainly, I just spoke with my client, I mean, certainly we can, between now and the time we go back to the council, work with staff, work with town council to come up with some language that will create a cap that's a reasonable one. I think that's a very good point. Thank you for raising it.
perfect. Marijuana, do you care if we,
hey, Josh, before you move on, I think what we're asking, I just wanted to echo, is what document will take precedence? Will the agreement, the contract zone agreement, take precedence in terms of that lodging for potential farm workers, or does our ordinances and code take precedence?
If the contract zone addresses something, that takes precedence.
Okay.
If it doesn't, then it's whatever's in the underlying zone. And it's really not in either place. In the underlying zone, what could limit it are the more typical setbacks and our minimum lot size requirements. So if, Josh is right, if you take away the minimum lot size requirements, the sky could be the limit.
Anyway, so marijuana, are we okay to, because again, I don't know that, because it says not limited to, I don't think there's anything in here that restricts growing marijuana.
Right.
And it would not be subject to
We haven't
any
had-
other.
How does the town feel?
What's the town, we haven't talked about that at all. What is the
That's not,
town's
again,
position
this
on it?
is all stuff that can get, but just, to that end, I think we
Is
also
it
want to talk.
allowed in the underlying zone and other farming? Are there restrictions on growing cannabis?
The council just, within the last 2 weeks, adopted a medical marijuana caregiver ordinance. And
Right.
so anybody that is growing marijuana and dispensing it as a caregiver, which is not to say a retail establishment, but just a true medical caregiver, they have to register with the town, and we have to know that they are in a particular location and what they're doing. As far as somebody having open fields and growing marijuana, we don't say you can't do that. I don't know how we would know that. The whole impetus for this marijuana licensing situation is there was a property owner actually kind of across the road from here whose neighbor grew marijuana outdoors, and the scent was objectionable to the point they brought it to the council, and that started this whole process. So, and I know we have an abutter here tonight, so it'll be interesting to hear his views about that. It could be something that you just straight up preclude.
All I'm saying is even if we do have a restriction in the underlying zone, we would not in this zone. Because the production, keeping, or maintenance for sale of plants, blah, 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 not limited to. There is no limitation. And it's in the contract zone, so there would be no limitation, whether there's a limitation on other zones or the underlying zone or not.
Excuse me?
Yep.
Would it help if we maybe adjusted the language to say whatever's allowed in the underlying zone? In other words, nothing different in the contract zone than whatever is, because, your ordinances change over time.
Yep.
And I wouldn't want to say,
I would say
for a
anything.
farmer 25 years down the road, gee, they said in 2022, you couldn't ever grow marijuana, and now everybody grows marijuana, you know, but if we said it's the same as in the underlying zone for
I
that
think-
particular crop, I think we could live with that.
I think that would address it.
Okay.
Again, not a lawyer, but it seems like that would be a reasonable. To that end, I think we ought to talk about the indoor amplified music, because I think if you want that, don't leave it to site plan, because we would not be allowed to allow for it in the site plan, if it's not in the contract zoning agreement.
Right.
So, along those lines, there's this piece that talks about amplified music in one paragraph, and then the very next paragraph talks about weddings. And talks about live music. I think you may want to reference the amplified music in that paragraph too, because I'm not sure if the special events allowance for amplified music would extend to the next paragraph. Has the driveway been reviewed by the fire department? And if not, would you be willing to allow for, any reasonable upgrades to ensure that?
Sure, and that, we show a 20-foot wide road in there based on preliminary discussions with town staff, and that's why it's there, but that'll all be vetted through the site plan application process. We'll be going down through, and again, I don't think there's anything, is there anything in the contract zone that would
No,
change the town performance standards on access and drive?
Again,
Jeff, what is the existing width of the driveway?
It's a little bit less, I think
It's about 18, isn't
I
it?
was gonna say, it's less than 20.
So you're expanding it somewhat.
Right.
And what the fire department might want is to see additional gravel shoulders that could support the fire truck,
So-
or could
when
be
we
for
talked
snow
about the
storage.
pullout, it was actually Bill Shane who suggested that, and I think that might be where he was headed with that, is you might need to have some additional gravel so that if a
Right.
fire truck was coming up, there would be room for,
Can I just point? So I've talked to Bill Longley, Bill Shane, and Dan Small about this issue. Had an informal meeting with Dan Small about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he didn't raise any objections to that at that point. So it seems like we've run some checks and balances on that issue.
thank you, and I appreciate that. Again, I'm just not sure we have any teeth if that becomes an issue. I don't think it necessarily will become an issue. My last one is, there are a couple pieces in here that speak to timing. One is on the food trucks and up to a year after site plan, but there's, again, if you don't come to us with a site plan for 10 years, then there is no effective limitation on that. So it might be nice to have but regardless, no more than X number of years.
Excuse me,
Yep.
I don't think I'm over here, Jeff.
I didn't recognize your voice,
Oh,
Carla.
my God, I just say. They can't start doing this until they have site plan review. They're doing a non-residential use, so anytime we have a non-residential use in town, they have to go through site plan review.
Now you're gonna make me find it and flip through here and find the actual language. For 1 year after the planning board grants site plan review.
For 1 year
Okay,
approval.
2
Right.
food trucks. So it doesn't, they can't put food trucks before site plan, but after site plan, they have a period of 1 year. Okay,
Right.
I'll buy that.
right.
Yep. And then, I'll get you. I got it. Enforcement. G, in the event that the developer fails to develop the property in accordance with this agreement, or in the event of any other breach set forth, the town council shall have the authority after hearing blah, 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 blah. But there is no, in the event the developer fails to develop the property in accordance with this agreement within 5 years, 50 years. it's an open-ended,
That was Natalie's language. I think that's standard language, but.
Okay.
But that's something we could certainly refer to her.
Yeah, let's do that, but my initial thought is that it's all going into conservation, the other areas, and that's really what the town cares about. If they never build the Grange or operate it, do we really care?
Right.
And if you do grant site plan approval, that's subject to our site plan ordinance limitation of approval, which you probably can recite, Josh.
I don't think so, Carla. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Lorraine,
No, I'm good.
you
Thank you.
good? Ann?
Yep. No, I'm
You're good? Okay. So, could you talk a little bit about, when we're in the workshop, just the general operating structure of what you're envisioning here? I guess one of the concerns that I remember was that the farm, finding that farmer might be a hard thing to do. But the way you're envisioning this, the Grange and the pub portion of it can live independent of the other. Is that
That's right.
correct?
That's right.
Okay.
It could. I mean, we very much would like to see it actively being farmed,
Yeah,
but there's, you know, you can't control that until we get going. But again, before this goes back to the town council, that conservation easement will be in place, and 90% of this land will be protected forever. I mean, I just really want to stress that. That is the town's benefit, and it gets it up front. If the Grange Hall gets built, great. We hope it does. We're looking forward to it. If it doesn't, I don't understand why that would be an issue. If unfortunately a farmer doesn't come along, or somebody comes along and doesn't make a go of it, it's still limited to open space, recreational use, you know, other uses. So I don't see, from the town's perspective, a downside. It will certainly be there and available, and the parties, including the holder, will be of that conservation easement, very eager to find somebody to farm it. Farmland is precious in southern Maine, as we all know, disappearing fast. So we're optimistic that there'll be somebody who'll be interested, and that they'll be very creative in how they go about it. I mean, having a year-round farmer's market building where people from all over could come to have their wares and other people could come and shop, be a great thing. You know, the Grange Hall would love it if there was a farmer there growing produce, that they could serve some of what's grown right there on the land. But you can't control that, but they are independent entities. You're correct.
I think everybody up here and everybody in town's pretty excited about the project if it comes through. I mean, it sounds like it would be a wonderful place to go. This board is just, as you know, a contract zone's a pretty powerful and important thing and hard to undo. So getting it right, whether it's you guys owning the property or somebody else down the road, we just want to make sure that we're not
Absolutely.
leaving things
And we
open.
appreciate your input. We appreciated it at the workshop and again tonight. And as we move forward, you know, appreciate any of the input that we get, and certainly have appreciated the town staff's help.
If there's nothing else from the board for the moment, so open up to public comment. Anybody here would like to talk on the matter?
Hi, I'm Chris Cabot, Executive Director of the Sheboygan Cumberland Land Trust. Just one really additional brief comment that I'll make about the farmstead area. Just want to be sure everybody's clear on what can and can't happen in that zone, because there's been some talk about permanent structures and temporary structures. So the conservation easement would allow the landowner to put, so there's the one residence there, but future barns, additional barns, would be allowed there. So non-residential barns, sheds, permanent structures can go inside that zone. And then temporary structures can happen elsewhere on the property. And then the only other, I think that was it for me. But yeah, we're happy about this project. We're still progressing with the terms of the conservation easement. Working with our partners, Maine Farmland Trust, and still actively fundraising for the project, but we're confident we can hit our deadlines and make this happen along with your timeline too.
One question is, do you consider a hoop house a temporary structure, regardless of size?
Yes, with limitations, as long as there's not any poured concrete. So the definition of temporary structure in the conservation easement will really drill down into is there a poured foundation? So there can't be any poured slab or even sonotubes make it a permanent structure.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Introduce yourself if you would, please.
Sure, behind the mask, it's always hard. My name's Rob Crawford, and I'm, I guess you'd kind of an abutter. I live at 88 Longwoods, which is pretty much across or up north of where the elbow is in the CMP property out that way. I'm in favor of the project. I think it's a wonderful vision, and I applaud Al and his thinking about how to marry some wonderful conservation opportunities for the town, also with a business that celebrates the rural character, for what this town used to know a lot more about. I've been out in that part of the world, over 20 years now, and there's no trespassing signs back in the day, but I've explored a lot of that back area. I know the riverfront pretty well. I have a friend that uses my property to access to hunt the power line. It's a really interesting, nice piece of property. A way down the line, it could be something that's also integrated into some of the properties over on the Falmouth side. The Hanson Turnip Farm is over there off of the Field Road. A couple things I wanted to say in sort of a general, larger term on this is that I sort of wear a little bit of a hat of being a neighbor, but I also be somebody who, I couldn't escape my duties on the land trust for about 20 years, so they made me an emeritus member. But I remember coming to the town here a long time ago with the concept of, what we could do as a partnership with the land trust and people with vision like Al, to try to combine these things as a package that has a wonderful and a long-lasting impact on the community here. I really appreciate Josh's drilling down on a couple of those things, because he's right. I used to wear the hat of a municipal lawyer for many years. A contract zone is something that you really have to think about now, but you have to think about where our town's going and what other things might be coming along. And I think some of the terms that you've raised can easily be resolved. I know Brenda professionally from days past, and also from her world in the conservation field as well, and I'm sure that these things can be accomplished. I do think it's probably a good idea to have some limitation on the number of units there, because the idea here is to try to keep that rural character and those things around as the town changes around us. I had a little short conversation with Christina and Carla on the way in. There's a lot of permits pending there, so we're going to have a lot more development in this town in these precious spots that are large open space, that have riparian area, that have a lot of wildlife opportunities, and that are going to be a draw not only for us, especially in these times, these last year, these conservation areas that the land trust has set aside with the partnership, wonderful partnership that we've had with the council and town, have become all the more important. So again, I say I'm in favor of it. I look forward to it. I'm not sure I want marijuana growing there, but we'll let that go for another time. Thank you much.
Thank you, much appreciated. Public comment is still open. Anybody else? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment, bring it back to the board. Any other further comments? Okay. So I think there are some valid concerns. I think everybody up here wants to see this succeed, for sure. But who owns the land next time, I guess, is what we have to look at, and there's been some valid concerns brought up about kind of restricting the number of beds, marijuana, sort of letting the underlying zoning take over wherever possible, not leaving open doors unrestricted, and then potentially defining a couple of timeframes. So where do we go from here, Carla?
I will make a motion that we recommend we recommend to the council approval of a proposed contract zone agreement with Synergosity LLC for the Grange at Longwoods, 76 Longwoods Road, tax assessor map R03 lot 13 and tax assessor map R03 lot 6A, subject to a request that the council review and consider the comments made tonight.
Second that.
Thank you, Paul. Any further discussion, comments? Okay, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congrats, guys. Step further. Okay, moving on. So, administrative matters and new business. So I meant to sort of ask the question, before whether it was okay to proceed without a sitting vice chair. I neglected to do that, but, so we have 2 open seats, one being the vice chair as well. So is that something we need to take care of now or at the next meeting? And then what, is the process already starting as far as new members?
Yes, the town council advertised for applicants. I think there are 4 very strong applicants that they wish to interview. The appointment subcommittee of the council will do that between now and the next council meeting with the intention to appoint 2 members to the planning board at that meeting. So hopefully we'll have those folks seated for the next meeting. What was the other part of your question?
The vice chair seat is
Oh,
currently
yes.
open.
I think it's perfectly fine to wait till next meeting, sure.
Okay. So do we want to put that as an agenda item first thing?
Let's do that, yeah.
And
Okay.
I guess,
Yeah, the only thing I would say is subject to the council actually filling those seats. I think it makes sense to wait until we have a full group to then have a vice chair. I mean, if we have to cover, if something happens and you can't be here for the next meeting, I think we can cover that, whether it's a chair or vice chair or, I mean,
does it even really matter? I mean,
I don't, I
it's
mean,
not-
that's,
one of the new members isn't going to be the vice chair.
well, you don't know. I mean, it could be somebody who's been on the planning board before.
Good point. All right. All right,
I'm just
so-
looking for less of a chance that that person is me.
So we'll see how that shakes out, I guess, then, all right. If you could let us know when Bill's services are, that would be appreciated. And then, a topic for discussion, maybe you guys can give it some thought for the next meeting. I had it in my mind for, well, a long time, whether we should be doing the Pledge of Allegiance during the meetings, at the beginning of the meetings. So, I kind of think it would be a nice thing. I'm not trying to make it into a big deal. You know, the flag brings up issues for some people, but I think it's a good thing to do. And so maybe next meeting we can have a discussion about that, how you guys feel.
Would you like me to see how other communities do it, or do you not care?
I personally not sure that I care, but I care what the people up here think. And that's it, I guess.
Okay.
So, that's all I have. Any other new business, administrative matters? Okay. H, adjournment.
So will the minutes from this meeting be provided to the town council so that they have all the comments about the Grange and
Yeah.
the commercial?
Yes, I'll make Christina stay tonight and get
That way, all the questions.
But there is also, they could also just watch the Vimeo.
Okay,
Yeah, we'll
was
make
it.
sure they get
okay.
the transcript.
Not that I'm saying anything about the town council's ability to read.
Motion to adjourn.
On that note,
That's a first.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
All right, we did it.